All right, it's 6 o'clock on Monday, January 15th, 2018, and I'll call the meeting to order. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest or genuine nature thereof? Deputy Stockman?
On the CCH14, the south side property, southwest corner of 81 and 402, that property abuts my property, so I won't partake in any discussion around that property.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is there anything else? Seeing none. So the purpose of this public meeting is to provide public participation and comment on the proposed amendments to our official plan and zoning bylaw to ensure consistency between the zoning bylaw and the commercial corridor policies, and provide for more organized, complete, and streamlined policies and regulations guiding commercial development within the commercial corridor. To open the public meeting, we just need to have a motion to resolve the public meeting for the proposed amendments to the official plan and zoning bylaw pertaining to the interim control bylaw be opened at 6:01 p.m. Councilor Hendricks and Councilor McKinnon. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay. So I'd like to introduce Jennifer Huff, our planner for this evening, to go through the PowerPoint on what the proposed changes are. And what I'll ask is that you refrain from asking any questions during the PowerPoint. After that, there will be a comment and question period from the gallery. Following that question period, we'll have comments and questions from our council. And then Jennifer will then provide the next steps as to what will happen after this meeting. And then we'll close the public meeting from there. So, Jennifer.
Thank you, Worship. So tonight I'm going to present quite a bit of information for the public tonight on why we're here and what we're doing. This is the overview of the presentation. First we'll look at some of the background, why we're here, the purpose of the proposed changes, and an overview both to the changes of the official plan, to the zoning bylaw, and then as Mayor Smith mentioned, I'll briefly review the next steps in this process. So, for the benefit of the public, the area that we're looking at is the area that's outlined in red on the location map that's before you. And this represents the service area. And the service area is the area that is serviced by Strathroy-Caradoc. There's an agreement between the Township of Adelaide Metcalfe and the municipality of Strathroy-Caradoc for the provision of services within that area. That area is broken down into two general designations of land. So the purplish pink color represents those that are intended to be commercial in nature, and the yellow is intended to be residential. And you can see the dotted line is the municipal boundary, and that's kind of important at the south end of the diagram there. So the area that we're really focused on is all of the lands within the area that's outlined in red, subject to the terms of the servicing agreement between the two municipalities. So this commercial corridor, there's a number of key aspects to this commercial corridor. We refer to it as. It's a gateway. It's the main gateway into Adelaide Metcalfe, Strathroy-Caradoc if you're coming off the 402 and from Highway 22. It was never intended to compete with Strathroy's downtown core or its industrial areas. It was intended that the commercial uses would be aligned with the planning policies. And it's intended that those uses comply with the permitted uses within the servicing agreement as well. So those are our four main assumptions and understanding of what this commercial corridor is to our municipality. The reason why we're doing this exercise in the first place is really to avoid situations where landowners have an idea, they're relying on planning documents to tell them what they can do on their property, only to find out that there's inconsistencies in some cases in those documents, or that municipal services might not actually be available to what would otherwise be permitted. So we're trying to avoid that situation where people have there's a miscommunication between what's actually permitted on the property. And this all started in April of last year. Council enacted an interim control bylaw, and that bylaw put in a prohibition on any applications for shopping centers or small-scale retail and office uses that were less than 5,000 square feet within this commercial corridor area. And this was done and began because there seemed to be a misunderstanding of what's permitted in that corridor. And so that was Council's first step. As part of that interim control bylaw that was passed, they requested that staff undertake a background report into a review of the planning documents in place, the servicing agreement, and staff did do that and came back to Council on November 20th with a fairly fulsome background report on where the municipality is with the planning documents, what the history of that corridor was, and really made some recommendations to staff on 3 possible options. Council reviewed that document, that background report, and requested that draft amendments be brought forward for Council's and public consideration to ensure complete consistency between the zoning bylaw and the commercial corridor policies of the official plan, and to provide for a more organized and complete document to guide development within that commercial corridor. So based on receiving that direction from Council, staff again proceeded to draft amendments to both the official plan and the zoning bylaw, and they were presented to Council for review and consideration December 11th. So at the December 11th Council meeting, Council went through line by line at those draft amendments. It was a very extensive process. It was 2.5 to 3 hours. So they really spent a lot of time considering all of those draft amendments, made some recommendations for changes and directions, and so those changes have been made for the most part in the document that's prepared and available on our website today. And I also note at this point in time that we have hard copies available of all those documents that have been prepared to date. They're here for the most part. If anybody wants a copy, they can be available after the meeting. And I won't get into, I don't think we're going to do line by line tonight on those changes, but certainly staff is available after this meeting or at any point in time where you need our contact information. If you have very specific questions, we're always available to tell you and talk to you about what those changes have been. So that leads us to where we are today. And so I'm just going to quickly go, again, what is the proposed reason for these amendments? Again, is to address the inconsistencies, to avoid the situation where landowners, where there's a miscommunication about what can possibly happen on the property, and to provide for a full document in terms of the regulation and the official plan policies. And so to that end, the changes that we're contemplating at this point in time to the official plan, I've highlighted, and this is at a high level. I'm not going to get into the details as I mentioned. So first of all, we are establishing and making clear the goals for the commercial corridor. We're spelling it out that it's intended to be an attractive, fully serviced commercial node intended for highway commercial uses. Those are uses that are automotive related, destination related. We clearly spell out that this corridor is a gateway. We revise some of the criteria for new development within the residential area of those of the corridor, and also for the commercial corridor. And to that end, I would speak briefly about the residential area. So on the boards behind us tonight, even on this one, you can see the area that's outlined in yellow. That area is designated for residential, and so we've now included some new policies that specifically allow for one lot infill development within the residential areas. Excuse me. If municipal services are not available, then private services, it's possible to develop one lot in there. There's a couple criteria that you'd have to meet, but otherwise we've included that as a new policy. We've also proposed to expand the priority employment area within our official plan. And so that means that if your lands are priority employment, if you propose to change it in a manner that it would no longer be commercial in nature, if you wanted to propose say residential, if you're designated as priority employment, you have to bring forward a report that would justify the need and the servicing situation to support that application. And it's an extra level of protection, if you will, to make sure that a full application is made. And it comes from policies from the province that say we need to protect these areas of employment for employment purposes. So if you're going to change them, we want to make sure that we're doing it correctly. We're not going to impact the municipality in any negative way. So we're expanding that priority employment to correspond with the entire commercial corridor. So in the past, this area has not been included in the priority employment area, so we're actually including this bit now so that the entire corridor would be subject to that policy. Excuse me. And the other thing to note, within the official plan, we're now going to specifically state that all development proposals within the commercial corridor have to have site plan approval and confirmation of servicing. And this was something that was already really usually required, but it's now spelled out in the policies to make it clear that that's an expectation, so people know that right up front. So those are the policies in the official plan. The key changes to the zoning bylaw. So the policies are the high level direction for growth in a municipality, and then the zoning bylaw is your document that regulates and really on a site-specific basis tells you what you can and cannot do on your property. And so we've proposed some amendments to the zoning bylaw so that it matches the policies of the commercial corridor. So the first thing I'll mention is we now include a couple new definitions. So previously the zoning bylaw didn't include a definition for landscape open space. We now include that. We also have changed the definition of motel and hotel, and that's really because the definition was there was really only, it was a very limited definition. So we now reflected the fact that hotels are kind of full service. They can include meeting rooms, they can include entertainment facilities, recreational facilities, if you will. So we've amended that to reflect what is now a modern motel, hotels type establishment. We've also suggested changes to the definition of shopping center. And I note that one. So shopping center currently is prohibited within the zoning bylaw. And currently it's defined as a building or group of buildings that are planned, designed, or developed or managed and located on the same lot and has a floor area greater than 2,000 square meters. So it was felt that perhaps that wasn't the best definition. 2,000 square meters might not be the best number. And so council spent a lot of time reflecting on that and coming up with a proposed new definition, which has been suggested as being a commercial plaza. So anything that has 3 or more tenancies within one building or a group of buildings is now going to be considered a commercial plaza, and that is what is going to be prohibited. And we can get into that at the end of the presentation, just to review with council if that's the correct direction. The other things we've done is many of the properties within the commercial corridor are subject to a holding provision, and that holding provision requires site plan approval or servicing. And so what we've done is within that commercial corridor zoning, and this is really kind of a technical thing. Now, all properties right from the get-go are going to get spelled out that you need site plan and servicing. So you don't need to have this H beside every property to tell you that you need to do that. You're just going to need to do that, period. And then some of the additional regulations that we've added barrier-free parking regulations. And that really comes from the Accessibility Act. They guide essentially how many and what size of parking spaces you need. So our zoning bylaw has tried to reflect that. We've implemented some new regulations on greenhouses within the corridor. So that was a use that was already permitted within the corridor. And so we felt that if that was going to maintain a use that was in the corridor, then let's make sure that we do it right. So it has to have a certain size of lot. So you have to have at least 4 hectares, sorry. There's a maximum lot coverage. So you can't cover the whole property with greenhouse now. You can only cover up to 40%. And there would be no manure or compost stored on the site, which makes sense given how close it is to the residential properties. We've implemented some new regulations on automotive service stations. And that one's an interesting one that I will spend a little bit of time on. The automotive service station amendments really, it allows for parking both in the front yard and pumps to be located in the front yard, contrary to some other regulations that we've considered bringing into the zoning bylaw. But in addition to that, what we have suggested is that if there's 3 or more existing service stations, so gas stations, within a 750-meter radius, if you're going to bring any more into that area, then you need to do a market analysis to justify the need for another gas station within that 750-meter radius. And that's reflective of the fact that we've had several proposals for gas stations within a very small area of Adelaide Metcalfe along this corridor, and there's also been several new gas station developments in Shasta and Caradoc. So it's a use that, if it goes out of business, it's a difficult one to transition into something else, and we thought perhaps this is one way of protecting the municipality to ensure that it's a use that is needed in that location before it's permitted outright. So that was automotive service station regulations that we've included. We've also included some provisions on drive-throughs. So if you think of the Tim Hortons, really the municipality, the zoning bylaw doesn't have a lot to guide how that queuing works for Tim Hortons or McDonald's development. And so we've suggested some regulations that would say, you need to have a traffic study if you're going to have a really big, drive-through, right? You're going to have lots of cars, so you need to do a study to make sure that there's no traffic impact on the adjacent roads. And we've also included some direction that if you're abutting a residential use, then you need to maintain a significant buffer to that residential use relative to both the queuing spaces, the order boards, the car wash bays, et cetera, et cetera. So we've tried to provide for, their permitted use, but if they're going to locate near residential, then there should be some compatibility regulations in there to ensure that they'll limit an impact. So again, continuing on with the zoning bylaw, we've added a few new uses into the commercial corridor. So we're recognizing explicitly any existing use that's there now is specifically permitted. We're adding contractor's yard and accessory office within a main building is now specifically permitted, and motel hotel is permitted. And then we have introduced some minimum landscape open space requirements. So it's common in zoning bylaws that any property, whether you're commercial or residential, needs to maintain a certain area of green space on their property. And so we've suggested that 10% be maintained on those properties along the commercial corridor. And then we've also introduced, as I mentioned in the official plan, we want to make it clear, even in the zoning bylaw, that any development, redevelopment is requiring site plan and confirmation of servicing being available. And then last on this slide, we've introduced new maximum parking area requirements. I know this is thrilling stuff, but bear with me here. So maximum area, so we don't want one property to be fully covered just as a parking lot. So we've suggested that perhaps as a ballpark, we maintain a maximum of 40% of the lot for parking, and we want to try to encourage parking to locate along the side yards and in the back rather than in the front. So we're suggesting 25% of that parking that's permitted can be in the front, but the rest of it should be along the side and the back. And that's really, again, going back to the corridor being a gateway and trying to maintain some green along that corridor to make it look nice when you enter into the municipality from the 402. And the last thing I'm going to mention, I think, oh no, not last thing, but one of the key things that we've done in the zoning bylaw, as I mentioned, there was some concern about what can be used along that corridor. And so we've tried to make it very explicit that if you are going to permit an office along the corridor, we don't want it to be a really small scale, say legal office. We want it to be a 5,000 square foot or larger office along that corridor. And so we've introduced new minimum building floor areas to encourage that larger size commercial, retail, or office type use along that corridor. And then finally, again, we've introduced, and this again gets back to our gateway design assumption, is that Center Road is a gateway. We want landscaping along that corridor. So in addition to the 10% landscaping required, properties, when they go to redevelop, or when they come forward for development, will also be required, we're proposing to have a 3-meter buffer of green along the road. And so that can be plants, trees, just grass, whatever, but somehow we're going to suggest that there should be a real push to try and get that corridor to be as green and as inviting a streetscape as we can. And in addition to that, when there's redevelopment that prompts this requirement, you'll also be needing to submit a landscape plan to show what you're going to plant there to make sure that it is compatible with it being adjacent to a road, because lots of plants are salt sensitive, and so we want to make sure that we get the right types of trees, the right types of bushes, so that they'll be able to stay there for a number of years. And then the last couple, so we've done some minor housekeeping renumbering, so that doesn't need to be said outright. There's a number of redundant zone categories. So some properties are CC-4. The -4 means you're permitted a restaurant, but in fact a restaurant is already permitted within the CC base zoning. So we don't need to continue with those. We fixed those up. We just put them back into the general CC zone. And then to that end, we've suggested revision to a number of the zone maps to reflect this suggestion that our zoning bylaw and our zoning categories should match with the intended official plan designation. So first and foremost, I'll note right at the bottom here on Schedule 23, you see that A to CC. That's a small error on our part. So the agricultural zone is there now, and it's proposed to actually go into a UR, which is a residential zone, not a CC. It's within the residential designation. That was just something that we missed correcting on that map. The other things to note on this map, so you'll see a number of properties along the west side of Center Road. So right in the middle there, that's Center Road, County Road 81. So the CC-1, the U, and the URs are all proposed to go into the straight commercial corridor zone. And then as well on the east side of the road, you can see the lands outlined in red that are...
Jennifer.
Yes.
West.
Sorry.
East. Yep. Just so that, sorry.
Oh, you're right. Up or down. There you go. This hand. This side. Okay. So, otherwise known as the cutting lands. So those are proposed to go from agricultural to CC. So as I mentioned, existing uses will continue to be permitted, but it just means that those properties we're proposing that they be placed in the commercial corridor zone. And on the other side, as I mentioned, So the properties that are currently zoned residential would go into the commercial corridor zoning category. So this map again, if you can see the Cuddy property on the south end there continues north, and so that will again also get extended into the commercial corridor zone. Many of those smaller properties, those are the redundant zone categories that are going to get changed and fixed up. And again, Cuddy properties to the north end also going to get rezoned into the straight CC zone. Oops. And that's hard to tell. Most of these are redundant categories that we're fixing up. There's holding symbols that are going to get removed because they're no longer necessary. The one piece I would note that's really hard to see is that on the very north end, yeah, I don't have a pointer. Oh, no, it's not here. So this piece right here, so that's going to go, we're proposing right now to go from a commercial corridor zone with a H holding symbol on it back to agricultural. And that's because this property is actually located, it's here, it's this piece here, and the service area extends only to this extent. So the property and the zoning actually exceeds the service area, so this area will never be able to be, well, won't be ever able to be, but at this point in time, the servicing agreement doesn't allow for servicing out there, so it makes sense in our mind. We'll keep it within the designated commercial corridor, but we think perhaps the agricultural zone might be a more appropriate zone for that property. And then again, this is also just housekeeping amendments that we're proposing. Okay. So in terms of public consultation and feedback, I quickly want to state that to this point, really we've received very limited comments from the public. We've sent out the notice of public meeting, and really we got comments from the municipality of Stratford-Caradoc, and we just received a set of comments, and I don't think even council has copies. We just received them from a planning consultant working on behalf of one of the property owners that's going through development. So I'm just going to quickly speak to the comments that we received right now, and then I'll go into what's expected after this public meeting from you folks that attended the public meeting. So with respect to the comments we received from Stratford-Caradoc, their suggestion is that they be included as a reference when we require the confirmation of servicing, that it be in concert both with the Township of Adelaide Metcalfe and the municipality of Stratford-Caradoc, that's spelled out both in the official plan and the zoning bylaw. And that's for obviously the township to consider. And they suggested a slightly revised definition to the hotel motel to include reference to recreational facilities, and that I think is really intended just to ensure that that, for instance, a facility like a pool that would be open to the public would be something that would be permitted as part of that definition to hotel motel. I think it probably could be, but it would make it more clear if the term recreational facilities was included. And then there's also suggestion that we include both meters and feet when we do the zoning bylaw to make it clear what that conversion is. However, in reviewing your document, that's not an approach that you've taken in the past, so maybe that's consideration now, or perhaps a housekeeping measure. And then, so that was really the extent of Stratford-Caradoc's comments. And with respect to the comments that we received from Zelinka Priamo, the planning consultant for one of the site plans that staff is reviewing at the moment. So they, I think they're concerned about making sure that what they're proposing would fit into the commercial corridor zone. So that will require, some review of staff to make sure that that's the case. It appears that that is. They're proposing restaurant, drive-through, hotel, motel, all the things that we're permitting within the commercial corridor. They're proposing that, in fact, small retail uses be permitted within the commercial corridor. That's something that's kind of contrary to what we're talking about tonight, but we can consider that. They'd like a site-specific amendment to permit the height of the proposed hotel as part of this process. They mentioned consistency with the AODA standards, just to review our area-free parking requirements, making sure that they are compliant and consistent. They would like some clarification about the queue space provisions that we've suggested, and that perhaps putting a 40% maximum parking area may be overly restrictive. So these comments will get circulated to you and as part of the package that council will get. And then I would note that the public comments that we received today at the open house, the open house was well attended. We probably had 25, 30 people come through. Some are here today, some just came and went and got the information and put their name down on the sheet. There's a lot of concern, especially about this area. So this is the area that we're proposing some changes from properties that are zoned to permit residential and going to commercial. And really the concern has to do with compatibility of commercial corridor uses with the adjacent residential properties within Stratford-Cardock. There was some discussion about possibility of, can there be residential development there? What would that mean? Is that something municipalities would consider? Would scaling back the scope of commercial uses that were permitted there, is that something that would be entertained? And as well noting that there's a fairly significant grade difference there between the back end of Adelaide Metcalfe and Stratford-Cardock, and how would that work, right? If we had buffer strips or fencing or anything, would that actually provide an adequate level of mitigation between the two uses? And certainly staff is very aware of the fact that along the commercial corridor, we do have residents within Stratford-Cardock, and any kind of proposal moving forward, we need to have a consideration as to compatibility. How would that work? So that's something that I think staff is going to have to put to mind. I expect we'll probably get some written comments to that effect between now and moving forward, and we'll be able to, get back to council with our, recommendations on how to move forward with that. To be honest, I don't have a complete answer. It's a big question, so we'll get into that. But in terms of everyone that attended here today, as Mayor Curtis mentioned, we're available for questions tonight after the meeting as well, or any time between now and the next couple of weeks. We would really like, if you could, get your written submissions in by January 26th. And that's because we're moving forward, trying to go back to council for February 5th. And in order to make that deadline, we'd like to get your comments in so we can consider them and get some sort of get some feedback on them and be able to put to mind a recommendation to council on where to move forward. And as well, I note, this is a formal planning process, and it's really important that if you want to participate now and moving forward, if, for instance, you wanted to appeal something, we need to have a record that you participated, and ideally we have something written from you. We need that in order for you to protect your appeal rights. So I just mentioned that. And so staff are going to consider all of the written submissions, all of the oral submissions that we received tonight, and between now and moving forward to January 26th. At that point, we're going to be getting down and writing the report and making a recommendation to council. And then council will have some more to say. I don't know if that's going to be the time. February 5th may or may not be the time that council makes a decision, but that's the next time it's going to go back to council. And then I'll put this up. That's our staff contact information. And Mayor Curtis, if you'd like, I know council spent quite a bit of time on a few key areas. I don't know if now would be an appropriate time to kind of just go back and just focus quickly on those ones for council's benefit, or if you want to open up the discussion first and deal with that after.
I think it might be, just for clarification, even for the public, maybe we hit on those top discussion items, and then that way it can bring some clarity to the public, so they, most likely those questions will come up,
Yep.
and we'll be discussing them anyway, so it's best to get them discussed now and
Okay.
with the public.
All right, so as I mentioned before, council spent a long time, December 11th, reviewing the policies and the regulations line by line, and so there seemed to be quite a bit of focus on several key topics. So when we as staff prepared the documents that you have tonight, we tried to respond to council's direction and suggestions. And so I'm just going to talk briefly on those things. So there's quite a bit of discussion about the addition of a contractor's yard into the official plan and the zoning. And so what we did is we added it to the zoning, and we left it out of the official plan just because I think the official plan is the venue where you get your specific uses that are permitted. If it's permitted in the zoning, it's permitted, it's reflective. And I don't think it needs to be spelled out perhaps the way that some of the other uses are spelled out in the official plan. And that was our recommendation going forward. And I'd like to get a little bit of feedback if that's sufficient, or if you really want to include reference to contractors yard in the official plan.
Comments from council regarding that? Are we happy with it just being located in the zoning bylaw, or would you like it in the official plan as well? Councillor McKinnon?
I'm happy with it just being in the zoning.
Yeah, I
The
think
zoning
that's
is
right.
actually the working tool of the official plan,
Yeah.
so that's the one that most people would be most familiar with.
I agree.
So the other thing I just want to touch on quickly is that there was mention at the last meeting that the landscaping and open space buffer. So the way that the zoning bylaw reads is actually that your 10% landscaping is a requirement, but also, and in addition to that, is a 3-meter buffer along Center Road. So it's going to end up to be more than 10%. I think in the end, it's still going to be a nominal amount of green space, and it's not to say that won't be included as part of, can't be easily accommodated on the site, but just to clarify that for council. Okay, the next item was the gateway landscaping policies. So Center Road has been the focus and the thought of it being the gateway, and whether or not there's some discussion whether it's just Center Road or also County Road 33, 2nd Street being the focus. And staff consider that, and considering that 2nd Road extends from Adelaide Metcalfe, Strathroy-Caradoc back to Adelaide Metcalfe, there is not a consistent approach along 2nd line. And so staff is recommending at this point that perhaps now is the time just to focus on Center Road, rather than kind of, it would lead to kind of a choppiness, I think, if you will, along 2nd Road. And I just wanted to, bring that up, that we're still open discussion on that. It's just a point that staff, we discussed it a bit, and we weren't sure yet on definitively where to go on that one.
I think we should just stay and look after Center Road first.
Yeah.
We can always add that to it later on. I think this project is probably the most important part of, and leaving second or Center Road is the most important part, so I think we should dwell on it at this time and not worry about green space on 2nd Street.
Any other comments? Councillor Hendricks, any comments or additional comments?
No, I could live with that.
Okay.
No comment right now.
And so the last two, there's quite a bit of time spent on the commercial plaza definition. So within the documents, that definition is on the first page of your attachment 4 to the zoning bylaw. So the definition, commercial plaza shall mean a building or group of buildings containing 3 or more tenancies designed, developed, owned, and managed for commercial, retail, or office use. And so, I just wanted to get confirmation that that's council's direction. Because we did get some questions from the consultant just to make sure that they're not going to get caught up in that definition. And maybe there still is we could still include the words excluding specifically motel, hotel, restaurant, just to make it clear, drive-throughs.
My thought is that when I think of a plaza, each of those different businesses has its own entrance. If you walk into something like a hotel and it's got a gift shop here and something else there, I don't think of that as separate uses. I think of that as different businesses inside of a single entrance. So I didn't hear, I don't hear in that definition that each, when I think of a plaza, I think of something with, 3 doors.
Yeah, I think through your worship that the concern is that there's a hotel, drive-through, restaurant, and a gas station. And so there's going to be 4 independent buildings on the site, and there's still that concern that they're going to get caught up in that commercial plaza definition. That's not the intent, and certainly, my interpretation of what we've written is it wouldn't get included, but for the sake of clarity, do we include an exclusion policy to make it absolutely clear?
Well, it should be made absolutely clear.
Okay.
Because I don't really fully understand it exactly yet, so
Okay.
it should be clear.
Okay. So I will include an exclusion piece to that to outline specifically in the listed commercial corridor uses what is excluded from here and move forward.
I would agree, yes.
And the last item I just wanted to touch on is there was some discussion about transition policies, how this is specifically going to work with existing uses. So for instance, if you are currently a UR zone, you're going to get rezoned into commercial corridor, and your zoning bylaw has some very specific language about development of what would be a legal non-conforming use. So it's legal because it's existing. But moving forward, if, for instance, in your zoning bylaw, if you wanted to redevelop your house into making it larger and taller, your policies right now in the zoning bylaw would limit that ability. And I don't think that was the intent in this case, and I'm wondering if perhaps staff need to introduce something that would deal with that. Or are you okay with that? Because really, the intent is eventually that will get redeveloped.
Thoughts or discussion on, does everyone understand what Jennifer's saying?
Just a question to Jennifer for my clarity. So if I have an existing house and it's zoned that I can be in that area and it's res by fire or whatever, I have to remain on the exact footprint that's there now, or can it be enlarged to add a garage onto it? Is that what you're saying?
If something happens and it's a natural cause, that's treated slightly differently in the zoning bylaw than if you were purposely coming in and saying, okay, I have my house and now I want a detached garage and that. So it's a little more stricter if you just come in and want it versus if you had a fire and there was a disaster. So it's not unusual to have those types of policies or regulations in a zoning bylaw. They're very common. It's just in this particular case, because that seems to be a lot of the concern is what about, if I get rezoned, yes, you're permitted use, but there are going to be implications down the road. It can be dealt with by way of a minor variance, and and that's, you know, a fairly quick process, but it will be an added planning process. And it's not going to be overly cumbersome for people, but it will be there. So I just want to make sure that as council's aware, or if council wants to provide different direction, then, you know, we can try to do something.
Councilor Sanders?
So I don't fully understand this yet. So we got a residential builder house. It's going to be in a commercial zone. So if somebody's living in that residential house, once this is passed, wants to add a garage to that house, he cannot add a garage to that house. Am I correct?
So it's ultimately the interpretation of the chief building official to that question, but it would be my interpretation that you have a regulation that would limit that. So you would have to go to a minor variance to allow for the expansion of an existing permitted use.
I have a problem with that. I think if that house is there, is existing, and if it's going to stay there for a number of years, if a person wanted to add a garage onto it, I think he should be allowed to add a garage onto it instead of having to come to council for a minor variance. What chances are that's going to be developed commercial in the next how many years? 50? How many residential houses do we have that's going to be commercial? How many is there?
5 maybe.
That's it?
Yeah, there's not very many.
Three?
Three houses.
Wow. If it's only 3 houses, I guess if they wanted to apply for a garage or a change in house, they could come for a minor variance. Yeah, if it's only 3 houses, I can live with it. But if there's gonna be 20, 30 houses, I'd say no. Okay.
Any other thoughts on this? Are we okay with the current policy as it is? Councilor Hendricks?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to encourage somebody investing a lot into a house in a commercial zone, but it isn't enough to create huge headaches for us, so I would say existing regs are fine.
Deputy Mayor Stockman or Councilor McKinnon, any thoughts?
I'm fine with that.
I wouldn't mind hearing what the people that live in those houses have to say. They're ultimately the ones that are impacted by it.
Right, so that's what I have. As I said, the staff contact information, so if you want to, if you have questions, if you want to get in touch with us, please do so through those 2 contacts, and then the appropriate staff will be put in touch with you thereafter.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. So now's the time for any questions or comments from the gallery. If you have any questions or comments, just state your name and your address, just for the record. And I believe Jennifer's already noted that if you would like to have follow-up on the decision in the future, I believe there's a sign-up sheet there, and I think it was also passed around. So if your name is not on that sheet yet, please provide that for future communication. So again, is there any questions or comments?
I have lots of comments. I don't know if you want to go first, Bob, since you heard. Okay. I'm Rob Schwiko. I'm a resident that backs onto the H9 property. I don't know, can I bother you to put the 2038 map up?
Yeah.
Yeah, I will. So half my notes were made verbally while my phone while I was driving, so now I'm compiling here to talk to you. I wasn't prepared with the submission letter yet, but I will repeat this in a better format. I would probably, from this point back, I'm willing to bet the only person that listened to the 2-hour and 40-minute meeting that you guys had on December 11th. So I want to compliment the staff on your diligence that you're observing for this process, because it is appreciated when I listen to the detail that you guys were going into in the discussion. So it is appreciated that we're getting the opportunity to talk to you here. So So I'm a resident right here would be my property. Right here is where that orange chip truck is along the side of the road there, just to get positioning here. And I'm speaking for I'm going to say most of the residents on McDonald Street in Strasbourg, and for the people that I've talked to on the west side of McDonald Street. I haven't heard any opposition. Everybody is very strong supporting to what I'm presenting to council tonight. The purpose of why I'm here is I'm in opposition of the rezoning of the UR properties from residential to the commercial process. And I've got a list of supporting reasons why that I'd like to present to council for you to consider. So the parcels that I'm referring to are the first 6 parcels up from the conservation land. So here's one, there's a small corner of this, which is one, and then there's one on this corner, and
Rob,
I'll shake around.
can I just give you a tip? If you stand on that side, I know that you're presenting also to the
Sorry.
public, but the decision makers are up here.
Yeah, sorry. So the 6 properties.
Seriously, Rob, I can't see.
So the parcels that I'm referring to are the 6 parcels up, the 3 red boxes, but in there's 3 parcels in this red box, there's 2 in this box, and this is 1 in all. So this is the area that I'm focused on for the reason why I'm here, and the reason why some of my neighbors are here as well in support. Given from a high level view, given the fact that this is all urban residential, this is all urban residential, this is all urban residential, I'm fighting to understand the reasoning as to why we would have this sphere of commercial inserted right into that urban residential. In that, to find an appropriate business that would be suitable to get along with its surrounding environment is going to be very limited. I appreciate, at this point I can sit, so I don't need to point anymore. I appreciate the removal of the sub-definitions of CC, getting rid of the CC1, CC2, and going with a generalized view or address towards it. But if you were to take all of the potential commercial establishments that could be there and reduce that to a short list of, okay, out of those types of businesses, these are the type of businesses that could get along with residential on all 3 sides of them, you're going to come up with a very, very short list of possible businesses. And in that short list, to find an investor that would be willing to limit themselves to only that type of investment in that area, it's going to be probably next to 0 for probability. Contrary to that, anything else that's not in that short list, you're going to have, you'll have opposition from the neighbors that are directly abutting that property. So what's the best approach to create a harmonious development of this land? What would be better for the surrounding area? A huge portion of which is Adelaide Metcalfe taxpayers. Another huge portion of it is also Strasbourg taxpayers. So the supporting points that I just wanted to bring up was that mention that the lower part below the CC1 that is conservation land, and it would be more beneficial to let residential users enjoy that type of property rather than have a commercial establishment enjoy it. As well, I don't know whether or not the Conservation Authority has been consulted on this meeting and the changes as to that they haven't, okay. And what their feedback was, because I never got that out of the meetings that I listened to. Again, the parcels surrounding it at the east, south, and west are all urban residential. The existing 3 owners of these properties, I'm going to speak from rumor as to what I've heard, and I know one of them is here, a couple of them are here as well. They all want to keep it residential. The owner that purchased this property from Toronto purchased it with the intent of making it residential and found out after the fact that he wasn't allowed to. So Further support in keeping it residential would be that the existing owners all want it that way. So you have a surrounding community around the entire set of parcels. You have the owners of those parcels that want it residential, and yet we're still talking about forcing them to be commercial. That it's just another point of discussion as to whether or not that's proper. Back when Canadian Tire, this parcel of land in history, from what I understand, is that's where Canadian Tire wanted to build. I think one of the arguments that was brought up at that point was by these residents along the road that they were concerned with constant barrage of headlights always pointing into their living rooms from all the businesses that are leaving. We're going to have a similar argument with that as well. That traffic, the fact that this is urban residential, traffic and headlights and that is going to be a concern also. In the event that, from what I got out of the December 11th meeting, in the event that it is a business that has a dumpster or a stacking lane or something, the barrier wall that would be a requirement is only 2 meters. If you're standing in my backyard, based on the grading difference between Strathroy and Adelaide, 2 meters puts the top of the fence at my knee height. And if I'm up at my house, it's actually at my feet. So the 2 meters for a property that's backing onto those, 2 meters isn't nearly high enough. And anything higher for the owner or developer that's going to build here, they're going to look at it as a visual obstruction. Appropriate would be probably 5 meters to properly shield that from the residential area. Well, that's a pretty big wall for the developer to have to deal with. I don't know whether or not your plan addresses, when you speak of hotels and motels, height limitations with respect to the residential area and maintaining privacy with the walls and how the height is set with respect to that 2 meter height. That's another consideration I'd like you guys to think about. The lot lighting as well, light standards, if it's a 50-foot light standard, with how are we going to prevent that from illuminating all the residential properties in the area? Light is a significant problem in that anybody that is backing onto the existing car dealerships has their entire interior of the house glowing all night long. Now, there is a who was there first, the dealership was there first, the houses went in after. I appreciate that the urban residential development is limited by the fact that there is a master service agreement with the town of Strathroy. But when that service agreement was put in place, McDonald Street didn't exist. That was just farmland. So for this, at that point, to have been stipulated to say, okay, well, we're going to keep this commercial, we're not going to allow residential there, and this was still farm field, that was probably a reasonable assumption at that time. Since that time, things have changed. Now we are completely surrounded by residential, and I would argue the fairness of letting that master service agreement limit the options to saying this can't be residential, given the fact that the surrounding area is developed the way it has. And I think that's it. I gotta stop at that point to move on. The gateway comment that Jennifer brought up. The gateway appearance, I appreciate how the design is going to force the store frontages or the building frontages to be on the road, have the green space and the trees in that specified green space distance. But does it make sense to say this entire strip is the gateway and have that facade maintained along here, but yet you still go into a residential zone on this side of the street? So you're kind of getting that gateway feeling, but on this side of the street when I'm coming into town, it's residential. It doesn't, I appreciate the appetite to get that gateway appearance. I think it's important. I think that development of all of this land is important for both communities because I think we're in a prime piece of real estate here. I would argue that type of appearance from this point down is fair, or would even serve the purpose having it on one side of the street and yet you still have the residential area on the other side. The comment about the priority employment area, if I understand things correctly, that red box is not in effect at this point. It would be in effect if this was passed.
Correct.
So if this is passed and that is labeled a priority employment area, then anybody that wanted to apply to make it residential has that much more of an uphill battle to fight. So right now, at this point, there isn't that uphill battle with the province because it's technically not the priority employment area at this point until you guys pass this bylaw. I think that's an important thing to know here because it's not that much of an argument right now, I think, between Strathroy and Adelaide to come up with a reasonable solution to deal with these parcels of land to say, okay, well, we don't want future argument with the surrounding residences. We know that we're going to have to limit the business types. Financially, it's probably financially beneficial to deal with residential taxes and not volume of residences that you could fit in there versus the few businesses that you could put there. I think everybody could be maybe happier going the residential route if Strathroy would even be willing to have the conversation. Given the fact that they allowed that little annexation in behind the hardware, I'd be surprised if, at least asking the question wasn't possible. Just to say, hey, would you guys be willing to entertain a slight variance to that master service agreement to allow residential if council thought that was the right thing to do? That's it.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions or comments from the gallery? Yep.
My husband and I are Joe here for we fully agree with what you're saying. If we had up here, we live right in front of CC1 or behind. And that little strip of land that's there, what is that zoned as? Right in front of the red line and the broken line.
This here, I think, is owned by Adelaide Metcalfe, I think, isn't it?
So is it zoned, the part that's in front of the residential, is it zoned residential in that little area and then commercial in the other area? Or what is it?
Yeah, it appears to be in the urban residential zone.
Okay. So because we back onto that, we put in a proposal that residents, all our neighbors, came together and decided and asked if we could just purchase that land, and we haven't heard. It's been 2 years. So now we're like, okay, now this is all happening. We have no clue how that will be affected. So do I need to submit something about my concerns on that? Yeah, we already did, but we haven't heard back. So basically, we're waiting for a limbo. And I had a letter that I got from the township stating that they would be looking into it and we still haven't heard back.
Yeah, if you could submit the comments to Jennifer or staff.
Just to jump, who do we address the letter to? Is there somebody specific or just staff in general?
Either one on the list of the names, so
Okay.
either Aaron or myself.
So if you could just put the slide up with the contact information. Anyone else with questions or comments? Yeah, your name and your address, please.
My name is Mark Weiss. I live at 516 Darcy Drive in Strathroy. So I'm here tonight to formally ask council if they intend to enact a noise bylaw in the township of Adelaide Metcalfe, not only to regulate new noise or new construction noise that will occur at the new building sites along the corridor, but also to legally regulate excessive noise from existing commercial businesses along the corridor. Now, case in point, I live in the 500 block of Darcy Drive, directly behind the new road at Moffat and Powell. This was a quiet subdivision until they began building the Rona in the late summer of 2016. Since then, we've had construction equipment heard daily from 6:30 in the morning till sometimes 8 o'clock at night. They have an excessively loud exhaust noise from a large diesel-powered forklift in the lumber yard. And that begins too at 6:40 in the morning and sometimes runs until 8 p.m. at night, and this is 7 days a week. So I've complained to several different people, the Rona store manager, Bryce Love, company vice president, Darcy Quinn, Strathroy Caradoc bylaw enforcement officer, Matt Stevenson, your own Jeff Dunby, your chief building official, and no one has been able to do anything for me. So I would like to formally request that noise bylaw be in place so that we can legally deal with the noise from these, from all these new buildings.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to comment or have any questions?
I have a comment. I'm on Strive Auction at 8 Charles Boulevard, and I have a very good interest in that UR property. I'm one of the owners, my sister's the other owner. And we bought that land a few years ago, and it's zoned residential. When you look at land, you always got to look at the highest and best use of it. Planning 101, Gert and all about that. And right now, it's very lot. And Rob scares me with his comments about it's a limited 4-acre piece of land for a commercial. What would really go in there? What commercial building or business would really go in there and pay a good value for that quality land? It's very limited. Not only is it limited, whatever's going in there is going to be a problem with McDonald's Road. Here's McDonald's, their houses are 500 plus. I'd be pissed if I lived on McDonald's and me and Joanne put in a whatever in there or sold it to whatever and they put in whatever. It'd be crap. The best use for that property is most definitely residential. It's zoned residential, and I get that council wants to make it easy to do commercial because you have a water and sewer problem. And that's the root of the evil here. Adelaide got into a bad deal many years ago, and I was involved. I've been a resident of Adelaide 57 years. When the water and sewer came down 81 Highway, it was jammed down our throats, and we paid a lot of money for it. And it was unfair, and there was no discussion, which is fine. It's, what's done is done. But we can stop what's going to happen. Water and sewer, Adelaide Metcalfe went in a bad deal with Strathroy. Wasn't on an official plan. It's had a 10-year moratorium. I think that in 2013 you signed another 10-year that water and sewer will not be used for residential. Now we have a beautiful area there with our property plus even the, I'll call it Canadian Tire property. Would be fantastic from Tony Nordoff straight down the town limits to remain residential. The problem is the water and sewer. And that is a big issue. And Strathroy's not going to give it to you, or us, or them, or whoever, but we have to work something out because I think if we're limited to what we can put there, I think it's sad. Also, for the restriction of building barns or sheds or whatever, Strathroy Steam Clean, Charlie Harnett, he's not here today, he's down in Costa Rica living the life. We're freezing our, you know what. But anyways, his son is planning to take over the business. His son likes to build a nice shop on the side where he can park his truck, bring in carpets and everything. According to this bylaw, he might not be able to because he's restricted to do business. And yet, I don't know if the commercial, Tony's in commercial, Charlie and Chris, the other fella, but I don't think Chris is not here tonight. Well, what limitations does that put on for Tony if he was selling his home as a residential home? Is it going to be a negative impact? But I know as the whole area, I think we're neighbors, and I don't care if you're in Adelaide or Stratford, you gotta get along. These people on McDonald Ave, to have something built there, and if I had a $500,000 home plus, it will devalue. You know that. That's just plain real estate. And I think you can develop that nice little area there, and it's great tax dollars and not a bunch of work for Adelaide to do. And we will, we have comments. I have an envelope for you, Curtis, at the end, Mr. Mayor. And anyways, thanks for your time and concerns.
Thanks.
Don't you want to build a couple more gas stations?
Yeah, we need another gas station. Only 10 in town.
I want one that stays open past 11.
Yeah, that's true.
If you could enforce that.
I think it's up to it.
Okay, is there any other questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor, can I just add on to what Pat's commented on? Anybody that stops at the intersection of Panel and Center Road, and just if your fan is on in the car and you're stopped for 10 seconds, you drive away for 5 minutes afterwards, you have that smell of burnt burger grease, right? I'm not knocking Burger King, I love eating it. I don't know how people can live across the street from it. In my situation, his situation, dominant wind is from the west. If you were to put, what's a possibility for Putz's land? McDonald's would be a possibility there. If for my property, which is valued well over $500,000, if McDonald's went there and I smelled the deep fryers all day long, my property value is going to plummet. And the first person that just walks in the backyard looking at the house, as soon as they smell it, they're going to know. The types, this goes back to the types of businesses when you generalize the CC and you leave it wide open, the types of businesses that can be there that are potentially offensive, the list of them is huge. The list that isn't offensive is very, very small, and that small list wouldn't even think about a property that small anyway. So I have no problem. My submission to your council, I have no problem CCing that to the Strathroy Council in requesting as a Strathroy taxpayer that Strathroy's council also consider some sort of an agreement with Adelaide Township that's amenable to everybody so that we can all get along in this area harmoniously and not have any arguments 5 years from now when somebody finally decides to build there.
Is there any other questions or comments?
Hi, it's Jay Cakes. I live between these guys, kind of beside the McDonald, 436 McDonald. It's just really concerning hearing the comments from the gentleman that lives on Darcy behind the Rona. I mean, if that's zoned commercial, and no matter what business goes in there, it's going to negatively affect all the houses on McDonald Street. I can't see any. It's hard to think of a commercial business that would go in there that would be a good fit in that particular area. The land area is so small. I mean, I don't know what you could put in there that wouldn't be a problem. And then once the building goes in, I mean, what are you possibly going to tell Rona now? Like, oh, you can't have a diesel forklift. Like, it's so hard to go back. Right? It seems like now is the time to deal with it. Leave it residential. Put houses in there, and it's best fit for what the parcel land actually is.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the gallery wishing to speak? Seeing none. Any questions or comments from council? Director Stockton?
I certainly appreciate the comments, especially from the residents along McDonald and the owners of that urban residential area. And let's put it pretty bluntly, we have an agreement with Strathroy CareDoc with regards to servicing. The flexibility, Matt isn't here anymore.
He ran quick.
The flexibility of that agreement is nil. And I think for the betterment of all the community. It would be nice if it would be able to be looked at and some modifications made to work things out better. Whether that would be it would be possible or not, I don't know. I know from my personal perspective, yes. I don't know about the other parties that are involved. So, and that's part of the reason why this meeting is here, because of the original annexation agreement and the servicing agreement. Some of the stipulations in those agreements maybe fell through the cracks a little bit. And that's where we've gotten into issues between the communities. And we're trying to I won't say rectify that, but we're trying to prevent this from becoming more of an issue. But I would love to be able to say, as a greater community, that we can all get along.
Mayor Curtis, are we allowed to ask questions, or is it closed? I know it's online, so.
Come on, Curtis.
I like to just be nice just to keep it as comments from council, and that way you had, everyone in the gallery's had a chance to speak. If not, we will be here for a very long time if it goes back and forth. So just comments from council, and then if there's any additional comments you'd like to make, I'm sure staff and council will be around to discuss, but also the correct opportunity would be sending in a letter. Any other questions or comments from council?
No, actually, Nick, Councillor, said it very well. I do agree with Nick, but we're dealing with Strathroy and we're Adelaide Metcalfe, and it would be nice if we could sit down and maybe there's an issue that could be solved, but I do agree with Nick, and I'm sure all of councillors agree. But whether it's possible, I don't have that answer. I think we could certainly look into it one more time, but I don't guarantee anything. I do agree with Nick totally, but is it possible? I don't know.
Councilor Hendricks?
Well, I mean, I see a really obvious solution. I've got the Google map up here of this area we're talking about. I see a really obvious solution, but it's not one that Adelaide Township is willing to consider, I'm pretty sure. So.
A big park. A big park.
That's here, this is good.
And I understand the flexibility. I mean, ideally, if it would have been a totally different situation if we got that developed commercially first, then it would have been really difficult to get that residential stuff developed. Even though, I mean, that is what the OMB decision was, that area was to be residential and everything north of that Strathroy got was to be commercial, and that's an OMB decision. So it becomes really expensive to start changing that. And I agree, there aren't very many uses for that, but you can't put in houses without service, and that's a big issue. So since we have so many Strathroy residents at this meeting, perhaps they need to go and speak to their council.
Services are there.
Councilor McKinnon?
Yeah, I'm just pleased that we've been able to kind of iron out some of the discrepancies of the servicing agreement, and it would be nice if we could move forward with Strathroy Caradoc and amend the servicing agreement. I don't know that Strathroy Caradoc may have the appetite to do so, because they don't want to be in competition with Adelaide Metcalfe for residential servicing or services there, so. Can appreciate your comments though.
We're looking at a very few houses, like we're looking at 2 spots in all of Adelaide Metcalfe. It's not like we're developing 6,000, 7,000 or 100 homes, it's just in that area. I think it conforms with the rest, especially with McDonald Ave.
Is there any other questions or comments from council?
No.
Okay, so just a few thoughts of my own. So just so everyone understands, the reason that we started into this process was not to change a lot of the zoning or doing any of those things. It actually all started with the minimum floor area of the commercial uses. That's where it all started, and that was the starting point of this whole discussion, and that came up actually because of the servicing agreement between Adelaide Metcalfe and Stratford-Caradoc. And after this presentation, we loop back around to discussing again the servicing agreement between Stratford-Caradoc and Adelaide Metcalfe. So that is the main topic here, even though we are talking about the official plan and the zoning bylaw. But I think council knows and also the public knows is that's something that we should address, hopefully between the two councils, and maybe we can make some changes to that. I hope there's a little bit of hope there. I'm not sure if there will be an appetite from Stratford-Caradoc or not, but I do understand the concerns of the residents in Stratford-Caradoc on McDonald there, and as well as the owners themselves, because it's true, that whole area is surrounded by the residential zone. I don't think there would be much discussion on this if everything was updated when we had that servicing agreement. I believe it was 2001. So if the zoning was all updated then, this discussion wouldn't be happening if it was all done properly back then. With respect with everything else, I think with these changes, it'll bring a lot of clarity to the development along Highway 81. When we look at hopefully the future development of a hotel near that Tim Horton site, it's going to bring a lot of clarity to those individuals that own that property and make it a lot clearer for them. That's really the other main purpose of this, and that's why council decided not just to look at the square footage of the commercial area of those commercial buildings, but looking at everything to make it clear. So then those developers, when they do purchase those properties, or the potential developers, that they know exactly what they can and can't do, the size of the building, and as far down as the queuing line in a drive-through. Who knew how exciting zoning could be? But I think with all your comments today, it has a lot of things for council to consider. And if you didn't have a chance to stand up and address any questions or concerns, please send an email either to Kathy or Aaron, or stick around and also talk with Jen. She has a lot of knowledge in this area. And again, if you do have any comments or concerns, or if in the future, if something that that is approved by council and you'd like to appeal that, you do need to have that written submission to be able to do that. So please take the time and talk with staff and send those comments in. I'll ask Jen if you want to just wrap up by saying kind of the next steps as to what we're looking at for timeline and everything else.
Thank you, Chris. Again, just to reiterate, in terms of next steps, please get your written submissions in by January 26th. That's really important. We're trying to get back to council on February 5th. And so you can look onto the website, the township's website, the Friday before that. So February 5th is a Friday, so it would be February 2nd. February 2nd that the agenda would be posted online. And so you can check it out, see what our recommendations or what our comments are at that time. And certainly you can attend the meeting if you have continued interest in this topic. And again, also available for any questions now at any point in time. Any one of us can help with that. And from there.
Okay, thank you, Jen. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out to the public meeting, as well as anybody watching on the video. It's great to know that people are watching our videos on YouTube, by the way. And
so he was maybe the only one. Just to clarify.
and everybody that came out to the the open house this afternoon as well. We just need a motion now to resolve that the public meeting on the proposed amendments to the official plan and zoning bylaw pertaining to the interim control bylaw be closed at 7:24 p.m. Councillor Sanders and Deputy Mayor Stockman, all those in favor? Opposed, carried. And with nothing else on our agenda, we need a motion to adjourn the meeting at 7:25. Councillor Perry, seconded by Councillor Sanders. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, thank you very much.